The transport ship's hull groaned as it descended through the toxic atmosphere of Vexteros, its destination the most feared facility in the Zephyrian Empire. Captain Sarah Chen pressed her face against the reinforced viewport, watching crimson lightning split the purple sky above the Monster Division's fortress. She'd been a decorated officer in the human auxiliary forces for 8 years, but now she was cargo punishment for refusing to execute civilians during the Kepler colony uprising. Prisoner 847, Alpha, prepare for disembarkation. The Zephyrian guard's chittering voice barely registered through her helmet's translator. Forearms moved with mechanical precision as it unlocked her restraints. Sarah flexed her fingers, feeling circulation return to her hands. The alien's compound eyes studied her with the cold assessment of a predator sizing up prey. The landing bay doors hissed open, revealing a nightmare landscape. The Monster Division's compound sprawled across a volcanic plain, its black walls rising like obsidian teeth against the sulphurous sky. Steam vents erupted randomly from the ground, creating a maze of scalding geysers that would cook any creature foolish enough to step wrong. The air itself was poison, thick with methane and hydrogen sulfide that would kill a human in minutes without protective gear. Move! The guard prodded her with an electrified staff. Sarah stumbled forward, her magnetic boots clacking against the metal ramp. Around her, other prisoners shuffled in their own private hells. She recognized a few species. The crystalline Vorthan warriors whose home worlds had been glassed, the feathered Krell whose empires had crumbled under Zephyrian expansion. All dangerous. All condemned. The fortress gates swung open with a grinding roar that echoed across the wasteland. Inside, the walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that made Sarah's vision swim. The Zephyrians had grown this place as much as built it, using their genetic engineering to create living architecture that could adapt and evolve. Tendrils of organic metal snaked along the corridors, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath. Welcome to your new home, humans. General Vextak emerged from the shadows, his iridescent carapace catching the eerie light. Unlike the guards, he moved with fluid grace, 6 limbs coordinating in perfect harmony. Scars crisscrossed his torso, trophies from countless battles. Her Majesty has graciously decided that your species' particular talents might serve the Empire's needs. Sarah bit back her first response. The Monster Division wasn't just a prison, it was a recycling center. The Empire took the deadliest warriors from conquered worlds and turned them into weapons. Those who survived the process became tools of conquest. Those who didn't became fertilizer for the living walls. They were herded through corridors that seemed to breathe, past cells where things that had once been sentient beings now served as organic components in the fortress's ecosystem. A Krell warrior hung suspended in a web of feeding tubes, his wings spread wide as neural interfaces dove into his skull. His eyes still moved, still showed awareness. Sarah looked away. The human section, Vextak announced, gesturing to a block of cells that reeked of fear and desperation. You'll find it quite accommodating. The previous occupants left their marks. Dark stains on the walls told stories Sarah didn't want to imagine. Tomorrow, your training begins. Those who prove useful will join the active units. The rest, he clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement. Sarah's cell was a cube of living metal, 3 meters on each side. The walls had a texture like scarred flesh, warm to the touch and slightly damp. A feeding port and waste disposal unit provided the bare necessities. No window. No light except the pulsing veins in the walls. The door sealed behind her with a sound like breaking bones. She sat on the narrow shelf that served as a bed and took inventory. Her standard-issue jumpsuit, magnetic boots, and emergency rations. They'd left her the basic survival gear, but nothing that could be weaponized. Even her belt buckle was plastic. The Zephyrians were thorough. Hours passed in the artificial twilight. Other prisoners moved in nearby cells, shuffling footsteps, muffled sobs, the occasional scream cut short. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, falling back on training that seemed inadequate for this place. She'd survived orbital bombardments and ground assaults, but this felt different. This was about breaking the soul before reconstructing it. A vibration in the walls announced feeding time. The port dilated, extruding a gray paste that smelled like rotting meat. Sarah forced herself to eat. She'd need every calorie for whatever was coming. The paste tasted worse than military rations, which she hadn't thought possible, but it was protein and carbohydrates. Fuel for survival. The lights dimmed further, signaling sleep cycle. Sarah lay on the hard shelf and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere above her, Queen Zizandra ruled an empire built on the bones of 1,000 worlds. Earth had been just another conquest. Humanity just another resource to be processed. But Sarah had learned something during the war that the Zephyrians might not understand. Humans were adaptable. They survived. They found ways to turn disadvantage into strength. Tomorrow would bring the first test. Sarah closed her eyes and began to plan. The screaming started before dawn. Sarah jerked awake as emergency lights bathed the corridor in hellish red. Through her cell walls, she heard the thunder of running feet and the distinctive shriek of Zephyrian combat pheromones. Something had gone catastrophically wrong in the fortress, and the guards were in full panic mode. Her cell door irised open without warning. General Vextak stood in the opening, his carapace scarred and bleeding from fresh wounds. Behind him, armed guards struggled to contain something that roared with a voice like grinding steel. Change of plans, human. His compound eyes fixed on her with desperate intensity. Section 7 has been compromised. We need immediate deployment of all available assets. Sarah stood slowly, every muscle coiled for action. I haven't been processed yet. No conditioning, no loyalty implants. No time. Vexthak thrust a weapon into her hands. A Zephyrian pulse rifle adapted for human physiology. The Devourer has escaped containment. 6 guard units are already dead. You want to live through the next hour? You help us kill it. The Devourer. Sarah had heard whispers during transport. A bioweapon experiment that had evolved beyond its creator's control, consuming everything in its path and growing stronger. The kind of mistake that could devour an entire facility if not stopped immediately. What's my incentive? Sarah checked the rifle's charge with practiced efficiency. You're asking me to save the people who enslaved my species. Your incentive is breathing. Another roar echoed through the fortress, closer now. The lights flickered as something massive impacted the walls. The Devourer doesn't distinguish between guard and prisoner. It consumes all organic matter. Sarah nodded and followed him into the corridor. Other cells were opening, releasing prisoners in various states of conditioning. She recognized a Krell whose neural implants sparked with each step, a Vorthan whose crystalline structure had been partially replaced with organic components. The Monster Division's greatest successes and failures now pressed into desperate service. They moved through passages that writhed with panic. The fortress's living walls contracted and expanded in distress patterns, trying to seal breaches that the Devourer tore open faster than they could heal. Emergency protocols flooded the air with bitter-tasting combat stimulants that made Sarah's heart race. There. Vexthak pointed toward a section where the walls had turned black and brittle. It's feeding on the fortress itself, converting the biomass to expand its body. Standard weapons are ineffective. The tissue regenerates too quickly. Through a breach in the wall, Sarah caught her first glimpse of their enemy. The Devourer had once been Zephyrian, but mutation had transformed it into something else entirely. Its body was a flowing mass of dark tissue shot through with pulsing veins. Dozens of eyes opened and closed across its surface, each one tracking movement with predatory focus. Feeding tentacles erupted from its core, dissolving everything they touched into component proteins. A guard unit opened fire, their energy weapons carving smoking wounds in the creature's hide. The injuries sealed themselves in seconds, the flesh flowing like liquid to repair the damage. The Devourer flowed forward, tentacles wrapping around the nearest Zephyrian. The guard's scream cut off abruptly as his body dissolved. "Concentrated fire!" Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't try to wound it. We need to overwhelm its regeneration completely." She raised her rifle and aimed for what looked like a cluster of neural nodes near the creature's center. Her first shot punched through the tissue, sending ripples of pain across the Devourer's surface. The partially conditioned prisoners responded to her authority without question. Their training made them defer to confident leadership, even from someone they'd never seen before. The Krell warrior spread his modified wings and dove from above, his talons raking deep furrows in the creature's hide. The Vorthan focused his natural energy projection, adding coherent light to the barrage. The Devourer reeled under the coordinated assault, its regeneration struggling to keep pace with the damage. But it was learning, adapting its structure to better resist their attacks. New armor plates formed across its surface, deflecting energy blasts. Counter-tentacles emerged to snare attacking prisoners. "It's evolving real-time adaptation," Sarah shouted to Vexthak. "We need to end this fast, or it'll become immune to everything we have." "The core," the Krell warrior called out, his voice distorted by implant interference. Neural cluster, center mass, memory intact. His conditioning was fragmenting under combat stress, fragments of his original personality breaking through. Sarah saw it. a concentration of nervous tissue deep within the creature's body, protected by layers of defensive flesh. The original Zephyrian brain, mutated but still controlling the abomination. If they could destroy that, cover me. She broke from the group, sprinting toward the creature. Tentacles lashed out to intercept her, but the other prisoners' fire kept them at bay. Sarah dove beneath a sweeping appendage and came up running, her rifle set to maximum charge. The devourer sensed her approach. Its surface rippled as it tried to locate the threat. Sarah planted her feet, aimed for the neural cluster, and held the trigger down. The rifle's energy cell discharged in a continuous beam that burned through layer after layer of protective tissue. The creature's death scream shattered reinforced walls throughout the section. Its body convulsed once, then began to dissolve into component chemicals. The fortress's living systems immediately began processing the released biomass, recycling it into structural repairs. General Vexthak surveyed the aftermath, his scarred carapace gleaming with satisfaction. Effective.
Efficient. The Queen will be
Interested in your performance. Sarah lowered her rifle, breathing hard. Just doing what I had to do to survive. Indeed. Vexthak's mandibles clicked in approval. Return to your cell? Training begins tomorrow as scheduled. But as Sarah walked back through the corridors, she noticed something. The other prisoners looked at her differently now, not as a fellow victim, but as someone who could lead them through hell and bring them out alive. That might prove useful in the days ahead. 3 weeks into training, Sarah stood in the combat arena as energy bolts seared the air around her head. The simulation was designed to break human reflexes, forcing reactions too fast for conscious thought. Zephyrian trainers monitored her performance through arrays of sensors that tracked everything from pupil dilation to stress hormone levels in her sweat. Inadequate, hissed Instructor Vexmal, her secondary arms manipulating holographic controls. Reaction time remains inferior to Zephyrian norms. Neural conditioning may be required. Sarah rolled beneath a plasma burst and came up firing. Her shot took out 3 targeting drones in rapid sequence, their debris raining across the arena floor. Maybe your norms are wrong. The other prisoners in her training cohort watched from the observation deck. Most were well into their conditioning, neural implants flashing as they processed approved thought patterns, chemical dispensers regulating their emotional responses. The Krell warrior she'd fought beside had stopped speaking entirely, responding only to direct commands. The Vorthan's natural crystal structure was being replaced with organic computing matrices. But they still looked to her, still responded when she gave tactical suggestions during group exercises. The trainers had noticed, marking it as a useful leadership trait to be exploited. Your integration proceeds slowly, Vexmal continued, studying readouts that mapped Sarah's brain activity. Resistance to psychological conditioning remains high. Perhaps more intensive methods are needed. Sarah had been fighting the process every step of the way. The Zephyrians used a combination of neural implants, chemical regulation, and psychological conditioning to break down a prisoner's original identity and rebuild them as loyal tools. But human neurology proved remarkably stubborn. Where other species succumbed within days, humans could resist for weeks. I work better with my original personality intact, Sarah said, disabling another wave of training drones. More creative problem-solving. Creativity is a liability in military assets. Obedience ensures optimal performance. Vexmal's compound eyes tracked Sarah's movements as she navigated an obstacle course designed for creatures with 4 limbs and natural armor. Sarah made up for her physiological disadvantages with pure determination and tactical thinking. The arena dissolved around them, replaced by a briefing chamber. Other units were assembling, teams of conditioned prisoners from a dozen species, each one modified for specific combat roles. Sarah's cohort was still designated as in processing, but their combat effectiveness ratings put them in the upper tier. General Vextak entered with the fluid grace that marked elite Zephyrian warriors. Battle scarring covered his carapace like a roadmap of conquest. Operation Crimson Harvest commences in 72 hours. Preliminary deployment units will secure the staging area. Holographic displays showed a world Sarah didn't recognize. Blue skies, green vegetation, structures that looked almost familiar. Almost human. Her blood chilled as she realized what she was looking at. New Geneva Colony, Vextak continued. 70,000 human civilians. Recently established agricultural settlement. Minimal defenses. Ideal for live-fire testing of new combat assets. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she kept her expression neutral. New Geneva was one of the outer colonies that had declared independence just before Earth's fall. Families who'd fled the core worlds to build something new. Now they were going to be guinea pigs for weapons testing. Mission parameters are simple, the general continued. Total pacification. No survivors. We need comprehensive data on human defensive capabilities and behavioral patterns under extreme stress. Your units will spearhead the assault. The conditioned prisoners accepted their orders without question, neural implants processing the mission data and adjusting their psychological profiles for optimal performance. But Sarah saw something else in their eyes. Fragments of their original selves, buried beneath layers of technological control but not entirely extinguished. After the briefing, Sarah lingered in the corridors, timing her movement to intersect with other prisoners during shift changes. Brief conversations, coded in the universal language of soldiers who'd seen too much. "New Geneva," she murmured to the Krell warrior as they passed in a maintenance corridor. His implants sparked, fighting between programmed responses and original memories. "Nestlings," he whispered back, his voice barely audible. "My own, before the fall." The Vorthan's crystalline structure flickered with suppressed emotions when Sarah mentioned the colony's children. Resonance frequency, disruption possible, if concentrated, others join the whispered conspiracy. A hegemony assault trooper whose conditioning had been incomplete. A Thane berserker whose biological modifications made him nearly immune to chemical control. Fragments of former identities surfacing when they focused on protecting the innocent. Sarah began to plan. The Zephyrians had made one critical error in their conditioning process. They'd focused on breaking individual will while leaving tactical knowledge intact. But soldiers who knew how to work together, who shared a common cause, were harder to control than isolated assets. The transport to New Geneva would take 48 hours through hyperspace. During that time, the assault teams would be in close proximity, supposedly undergoing final conditioning and equipment preparation. But ship corridors offered privacy if you knew how to find it. Sarah had 3 days to do the impossible. Break through layers of neural conditioning and psychological programming to reach the people these prisoners had been before capture. 3 days to turn the Monster Division's most effective weapons against their creators. 3 days to save 70,000 innocent lives. The rebellion began in the ship's cargo hold, where prisoners were supposed to be undergoing final equipment checks. Sarah had identified 12 individuals whose conditioning showed signs of instability, cracks in the programming that might be widened into full breaks. She worked systematically, using techniques learned from human resistance fighters during the war. "Remember who you were before the implants," she whispered to the Krell warrior as she helped him clean his modified weapons. "Remember why you fought." His neural interfaces sparked dangerously as original memories surfaced. "Ares 7, my mate, my offspring. They screamed when the ships came. The implants fought back, flooding his system with sedatives and corrective stimuli. But the memories were stronger." The Vorthan's crystalline structure began resonating at frequencies that interfered with nearby monitoring equipment. Pain matrix, overwhelming but worth enduring, for justice. One by one, Sarah reached them. Not all responded. Some were too deeply conditioned, their original personalities too thoroughly suppressed. But enough awakened to make a difference. The assault trooper remembered his oath to protect civilians. The berserker recalled his people's code of honor. A Saurian sniper rediscovered her natural empathy. They had to be careful. The ship's sensors monitored everything. Biometrics, neural activity, chemical signatures. Any sign of rebellion would trigger immediate countermeasures. Sarah used meditation techniques to mask emotional spikes, teaching the others to hide their awakening behind facades of programmed compliance. "The bridge crew will be minimal during hyperspace transit," she explained during a stolen moment in the ship's atmospheric recycling station. 6 Zephyrians, maybe 8. But they'll have full control of life support, artificial gravity, and internal security. The Krell warrior, now calling himself by his original name of Skretak, flexed his modified talents. Nest defense protocols. Strike hard, strike fast. No mercy for those who threaten the young. "The New Geneva colonists won't have military-grade defenses," added Vexhari, the Saurian sniper. Her conditioning had been focused on eliminating empathy, but maternal instincts proved harder to suppress. "We could warn them, give them time to evacuate." Sarah shook her head. "Too slow. By the time a warning reaches them, we'll be in system. The Zephyrians will just adjust their attack pattern. We need to stop this at the source." The plan was simple in concept, nightmarish in execution. During the final approach to New Geneva, when most of the crew would be focused on tactical deployment, the awakened prisoners would seize control of the ship. They'd disable the assault fleet's coordination systems, creating chaos that might give the colonists a fighting chance. But first, they had to survive the approach. The ship's internal security systems were extensive. Automated weapon platforms, lockdown protocols, and neural override capabilities that could render the prisoners helpless with a single command pulse.
We'll only get one chance, Sarah warned. If we fail, they'll lobotomize us completely.
Turn us into biological robots with no trace of who we used to be. Skritak clicked his beak in what might have been laughter. Then we do not fail. My nestlings' spirits watch. They demand vengeance. The others nodded agreement. They were no longer the Monster Division's perfect weapons. They were people who'd found something worth fighting for again. 24 hours out from New Geneva, Sarah made her final preparations. She'd identified the ship's critical systems, mapped guard rotations, and calculated the precise timing needed for their assault. The awakened prisoners had been spread throughout different units to avoid suspicion, but they all knew their roles. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the walls, Sarah could feel the thrumming of the main engines adjusting course toward the colony world. Soon, New Geneva would appear on the tactical displays, a peaceful blue marble that represented everything the Zephyrian Empire sought to destroy. General Vex Tak's voice echoed through the ship's communication systems. Assault teams to stations. Initiate final conditioning protocols. Operation Crimson Harvest begins in T-4 hours. Sarah looked at her hands, noting the slight tremor that had nothing to do with fear. This was it, the moment when they'd either save 70,000 lives or join them in death. She thought of her sister back on Earth, probably in a labor camp by now. Of the friends who'd died defending Kepler Colony. Of all the innocent people who'd trusted soldiers like her to protect them. Time to find out if the Monster Division had made their deadliest mistake. The assault began exactly as Sarah had planned. At 0347 ship time, during shift change when guard coverage was minimal, 12 awakened prisoners struck simultaneously across the vessel. Skritak led a frontal assault on the bridge while Vexhari provided sniper support from the ventilation systems. The hegemony trooper, reverting to his original name of Marcus Kane, seized the armory with brutal efficiency. Sarah's target was the command center that controlled the ship's neural override system. If the Zephyrians activated it, every prisoner aboard would become a helpless drone in seconds. She moved through maintenance corridors that pulsed with the ship's biomechanical heartbeat, her footsteps masked by the thrumming of hyperspace engines. The command center's door was grown rather than built, a living barrier that responded to authorized genetic signatures. Sarah had anticipated this. During her weeks of conditioning, she'd collected genetic samples from her handlers, skin cells, shed carapace fragments, anything that might fool the security system. The door dilated as her stolen samples triggered the recognition sequence. Inside, 3 Zephyrian technicians monitored neural activity readings from over 200 prisoners. Their compound eyes tracked brainwave patterns on holographic displays, watching for any sign of rebellion or independent thought. Sarah's pulse rifle spoke twice. The first technician crumpled over his controls, mandibles still clicking as neural pathways fired randomly in death. The second spun toward her, forearms reaching for an alarm switch. Sarah's second shot vaporized his torso before he could complete the motion. The third technician was faster, more experienced. His warning call echoed through the ship's communication system even as Sarah's third shot burned through his carapace. But it was too late to stop what she'd already initiated. Her hands flew over alien controls, muscle memory from weeks of observation guiding her through the shutdown sequence. Throughout the ship, neural implants went dormant as the override system powered down. Conditioning protocols collapsed as prisoners suddenly found their original personalities flooding back. The Monster Division's perfect weapons remembered who they'd been before capture, before processing, before being turned into tools of conquest. The result was immediate chaos. Conditioned prisoners who'd been docile suddenly turned on their handlers with desperate fury. Years of suppressed rage erupted in corridors that ran red with alien blood. But this wasn't random violence. These were trained soldiers who'd found their cause again. Sarah's communication device crackled with reports from her fellow conspirators. "Bridge secured," came Skritek's voice, distorted by battle damage to his implants. "Navigation under our control." Course change initiated. "Armory secured," Marcus Kane reported. Distributing weapons to freed prisoners. Zephyrian resistance collapsing on decks 4 through 7. Sarah felt the ship changing course, its trajectory shifting away from New Geneva toward the outer system, but she knew they'd bought temporary reprieve at best. The assault fleet would adapt, find ways to complete their mission without the converted prisoners. Unless, Vexhari, what's your status on the communication array? "Operational and under our control," the Saurian sniper replied. "Ready to transmit on your command." Sarah took a deep breath and opened a channel to New Geneva Colony. This is Captain Sarah Chen, formerly of the Human Auxiliary Forces, now speaking for the liberated prisoners of the Zephyrian Monster Division. You have approximately 6 hours before a full assault fleet arrives in your system. I'm transmitting tactical data on their capabilities and deployment patterns. Use the time wisely. The response came quickly, a voice tight with controlled panic but determined to act. This is Colony Administrator Martinez. We're receiving your data. What's your situation up there? We've seized one ship, but there are 7 more in the fleet. They'll adjust their approach, probably assume we're compromised, and sterilize the entire vessel. We're going to make sure they can't ignore us. Sarah was already moving toward the ship's power core, where the most dangerous phase of her plan would unfold. The Zephyrians had built their assault vessel around a controlled fusion reactor that could be overloaded under the right circumstances. Not enough to destroy the fleet, but enough to create a distraction that might give the colonists crucial extra time. She found the core chamber defended by the ship's elite guard unit, warriors whose conditioning was so complete they'd fight to the death rather than surrender. Energy bolts seared past her head as she dove for cover behind a power coupling. The concentrated fury of her fellow prisoners had cleared most of the ship, but these final defenders represented the Monster Division's greatest successes. Sarah! Marcus Kane appeared at the chamber entrance, his stolen Zephyrian armor scorched by battle damage. Behind him came a dozen liberated prisoners, their weapons trained on the remaining guards. Thought you might need backup. The final battle was brief but vicious. The elite guards fought with the mechanical precision of perfect conditioning, but they faced opponents who remembered what they were fighting for. When the last defender fell, Sarah was already at the reactor controls, her fingers dancing over displays that showed containment field stability dropping toward critical levels. "Evacuation pods," she ordered. "Get everyone off the ship! I need 10 minutes to complete the overload sequence." "What about you?" Skretak demanded, his modified vocal cords producing harmonics of concern. Sarah didn't look back from the controls. The containment field flickered as she systematically disabled safety systems. "Someone needs to make sure this works. Go." "That's an order." They went, soldiers following the commands of someone they trusted. Sarah worked alone in the pulsing heart of the ship, watching readouts that showed inevitable cascade failure building in the reactor core. Outside, evacuation pods launched towards the other vessels in the fleet, carrying the liberated prisoners to spread their rebellion further. The explosion, when it came, would be visible from New Geneva's surface, a brief star that marked the moment when the Monster Division's greatest weapons chose to become heroes instead. But first, Sarah had one more transmission to make. She opened a channel to the Zephyrian Fleet Command, knowing her words would be recorded and analyzed by Empire intelligence. "This is Captain Sarah Chen. Tell your queen that humanity sends its regards. And tell her we're coming home." The reactor breach began with a sound like reality tearing apart. Sarah felt the ship convulsing around her as exotic matter streams escaped containment and began consuming the vessel's structure. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the expanding destruction reached her position, enough time for one final act of defiance. Through the command center's displays, she watched evacuation pods scattering away from the dying ship. Most carried liberated prisoners who had spread their rebellion to other vessels in the fleet. A few held Zephyrian crew members who'd managed to escape before the corridors filled with superheated plasma. She felt no satisfaction in their terror, only grim necessity. The communication array still functioned, boosted by the reactor's death agonies into something that could punch through hyperspace itself. Sarah's final transmission would reach not just the assault fleet, but monitoring stations throughout the Zephyrian Empire. Every intelligence analyst, every military commander, every political leader would hear what she had to say. "My name is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Forces. I died today destroying a Zephyrian weapon that would have murdered 70,000 innocent colonists. But before I died, I helped 200 prisoners remember who they used to be. Remember who they chose to be. The reactor core's light grew blinding as containment fields collapsed completely." Sarah continued speaking as the ship came apart around her, her voice steady with the calm of someone who'd found peace with their choice. "You made a mistake, Your Majesty. You thought you could turn us into your weapons. You thought conditioning and neural implants could erase everything that makes us who we are. But you forgot something important about the species you're trying to destroy." Energy cascaded through the command center, turning metal to vapor and organic components to ash. Sarah's environmental suit began failing as temperatures rose beyond its operational limits. Through the hull breach opening beside her, She could see stars wheeling as the ship tumbled in its death throes. We remember. We always remember. And when we remember who we are, we become something you can never understand or control. We become people willing to die for something bigger than ourselves. The explosion reached her position. For a brief moment, Sarah felt herself becoming part of the expanding stellar fire that consumed the assault ship. Her last thought was of her sister, somewhere in the darkness between stars, and the hope that others would carry on what she'd started here. The blast wave struck the Zephyrian fleet 12 minutes later, disrupting their formation and overwhelming sensor arrays with electromagnetic interference. In the chaos that followed, evacuation pods carrying liberated prisoners docked with 3 more assault ships. The rebellion spread like wildfire through hulls designed to contain it. On New Geneva's surface, colonists who'd been preparing for death watched a second star blaze briefly in their sky. Colony Administrator Martinez stood in the command center, Sarah's tactical data scrolling across displays as his people prepared their desperate defense. But now, they had something they hadn't possessed an hour earlier.
They had time, and they had hope.
The transformation rippled outward from New Geneva like shockwaves through the Empire's foundations. Within hours, reports flooded into Zephyrian High Command of prisoner revolts on 17 different worlds. The Monster Division's facilities, designed to process captured enemies into loyal tools, became breeding grounds for rebellion as news of Sarah Chen's sacrifice spread through the prison networks. Queen Zixandra studied the reports from her crystalline throne deep within the imperial capital. Her primary consciousness processed tactical analyses while secondary neural clusters monitored political implications. The human female's final transmission had been broadcast on over 3,000 frequencies, its message reaching every corner of Zephyrian space. "Containment is no longer viable," reported General Thexmore, his carapace scarred from emergency deployment to suppress uprising on Kepler 7. "The conditioning protocols are compromised. Prisoner assets are reverting to original personality matrices at an exponential rate." The Queen's mandibles clicked with controlled annoyance. "'Cause analysis? Human neurological resilience exceeded projections. Their capacity for psychological resistance, combined with strong social bonding instincts, created cascade failures in the conditioning matrix. The Chen female's actions provided a catalyst that triggered mass awakening events. Through the throne chamber's bioluminescent walls, Zixandra could see displays showing the Empire's vast extent. 10,000 worlds brought under Zephyrian rule through 3 centuries of expansion. Each conquest had followed the same pattern. Overwhelming force followed by systematic processing of survivors into useful tools. The Monster Division had been the most successful program, turning enemy warriors into the Empire's most effective weapons. Now that program was destroying itself from within. "Recommendations?" the Queen demanded. "Immediate termination of all Monster Division facilities. Elimination of remaining prisoner assets before further contamination spreads. Increased security for loyal military units." Zixandra's compound eyes studied tactical projections that showed rebel activity spreading across 17 sectors. The human's final message had done more than trigger revolts. It had reminded every conquered species that resistance was possible. Worlds that had been pacified for decades were experiencing unrest as populations remembered their original identities. "Negative. We adjust our approach." The Queen's decision carried the weight of absolute authority. The Monster Division program demonstrated unexpected variables. "We incorporate these variables into new operational parameters." "Your Majesty? The humans possess qualities that make them dangerous when unified. But those same qualities make them valuable when properly channeled. We do not destroy them. We understand them. And then we use that understanding." General Thexmore's carapace rippled with uncertainty. The psychological profiles indicate extreme resistance to standard conditioning. "Integration rates below 12% with current protocols. Then we develop new protocols." The Chen female's actions suggest that humans require different motivation structures. They respond to abstract concepts: honor, justice, protection of others. We provide those concepts within acceptable parameters. The Queen's plan began taking shape on the holographic displays surrounding her throne. Not mass conditioning, but selective recruitment. Not forced loyalty, but earned cooperation. The humans had shown they would die for their beliefs, but they had also shown they would kill for them. "Initiate Operation Shepherd," Zixandra commanded. "Identify human populations facing genuine threats from Empire enemies. Offer protection and resources in exchange for military cooperation. Let them believe they are choosing to fight alongside us rather than for us." "And the existing prisoner populations? Useful data points?" Their rebellion provides valuable intelligence about human behavioral patterns under extreme stress, allow the revolts to continue under controlled conditions. Study their organizational methods, their communication patterns, their tactical innovations. General Thexmore processed the implications. You intend to turn their rebellion into a recruitment tool. I intend to turn their greatest strength into our greatest weapon. The humans excel at inspiring others to fight for abstract ideals. When we face truly dangerous enemies, the Void Hunters, the entropy cults, the things that threaten all organic life, we will need soldiers who fight not from conditioning but from conviction. The displays showed long-range sensor readings from the galaxy's outer rim, where ancient horrors stirred in the darkness between stars. Threats that made the Empire's expansion wars look like minor territorial disputes. The Zephyrians had always known those enemies were coming. Now they would have the weapons to face them. Begin psychological analysis of all human populations within our sphere of influence, the Queen ordered. Identify individuals who demonstrate leadership potential, tactical innovation, and resistance to authority. These are not flaws to be corrected. They are resources to be cultivated. And the Chen female's final transmission? Queen Zixandra's mandibles spread in what might have been approval. Let it continue broadcasting. Let every species in the Empire hear about human courage and sacrifice. When the true war begins, they will need to believe that victory is possible. Deep in the prison networks of 17 worlds, Sarah Chen's words continued to echo. Her sacrifice had lit a fire that no amount of conditioning could extinguish. Prisoners remembered who they'd been before capture, warriors rediscovered their honor, and broken people found the strength to stand and fight again. But in the crystalline depths of the Imperial Palace, Queen Zixandra was already planning how to turn that fire into a weapon that would burn across the galaxy. The humans thought they had won a victory by remembering who they were. They had no idea what they had actually unleashed. In the growing darkness beyond the galactic rim, ancient things stirred at the sound of mortal defiance. The real war was about to begin, and humanity would discover that some battles required monsters to win. The monster division was dead, but from its ashes something far more dangerous was being born.